Hello. Hello and welcome to the Brooklyn Rail's 904th New Social Environment. I'm Chloe Stagaman, the Director of Programs here at the Rail, and I have the absolute pleasure and privilege of being your MC today for a conversation featuring Charline von Heyl and Raphael Rubinstein. We're thrilled to welcome poet Judith Goldman here to close today's program. Before we get started, the Brooklyn Rail acknowledges Black Lives Matter. Here in New York, we're on Lenape-Hoking, the unceded land and waters of the Wappinger, Canarsie, Munsee, and Lenni Lenape people of the Delaware Nation and Shinnecock Indian Nation. We recognize land acknowledgements are not a replacement for necessary decolonial work, but serve as a reminder of place, of the legacies of dispossession and enslavement that sustain and enrich the stolen land we are speaking from. And now I'll introduce today's guest and host. Charline von Heyl was born in Germany and currently divides her time between New York and Marfa. She studied painting in Hamburg and Düsseldorf and participated in the Cologne-based art scene in the 1980s. Recent solo museum exhibitions include the Deichtorhallen Hamburg, Germany, the Hirshhorn Museum and Sculpture Garden in DC, among many others. Von Heyl's works are in the collections of the Musée Moderne de la Ville de Paris, the Tate, the Museum of Contemporary Art Los Angeles, and MoMA New York, among others. Raphael Rubinstein's most recent book is Negative Work, The Turn to Provisionality in Contemporary Art. Curatorial projects include Schema, World as Diagram with Heather Baus-Rubinstein at Marlborough this year, and Under Erasure, co-curated with Heather Baus-Rubinstein at Pierogi in 2018-19. His poems have appeared in several anthologies, including Best American Poetry 2015. He's a contributing editor to Art in America, professor of critical studies at the University of Houston School of Art, and we are so lucky to have him as an editor-at-large for the Brooklyn Rail. And with that, I am going to pass it over to Raphael.
Thank you, Chloe. And hi, Charline. The last time we spoke, when we did an interview together for the Brooklyn Rail, was, I guess, 2018. And I can't believe that much time has gone by. But one of the things that happened between then and now is COVID. And I'm curious, and I just wanted to ask you, if you feel like talking about it, how you dealt with both, in personal terms, but more centrally as a painter, as an artist, with the pandemic and with the lockdown. Was it something? Did you just close yourself up in your studio, which maybe you do anyway all the time? So I just wondered whether it made a difference to you in terms of your progress.
Well, I was actually incredibly lucky. First of all, I could be in Marfa, where I have a big studio and where it felt quite safe to be to work and be without feeling threatened. It didn't quite have the same apocalyptic atmosphere, but I was also incredibly lucky because just before COVID happened, the cellist Matt Heimowitz happened to come to Marfa. He had seen my show at the Hirshhorn, and he had this proposition to make, that he wanted me to repaint Botticelli's Primavera. And that, of course, was something that I would never have considered anything that would be of interest for me. But he and his partner, Jeffrey Yan, were extremely convincing. And they wanted to have the remake of the Primavera painting as a starting point to invite 81, actually at that point, they wanted to only invite 9 contemporary composers to make solo cellist pieces for Matt Heimowitz based on the 9 figures in the Primavera. And that turned out later to be 81 because it was 9 times 9, and now it is becoming a very big thing and a concert series, and the albums are out, and so it's been a long time since then. But the pandemic started basically the next month, and I was completely starting to be involved in thinking about the Renaissance. And it was this weird antidote. I actually drank the Kool-Aid at that point completely, and thought about Neoplatonism and read a lot about it. I fell in love with Botticelli, who seemed to have been really a lovely person, actually, and I was really fascinated by this enigmatic painting, and tried my best to make a remake, and it actually worked out. It was exciting, and it did something to me. And the whole idea that suddenly in history you have this moment where a pagan viewpoint is allowed back in after or so goes the philosophy after so many years and centuries of being shut out by the church, that suddenly you could have paintings that kind of had just big mythological scenes, and where naked nymphs were running around, and you could do an enigmatic painting like the Primavera that just is an image of transformation and of course, the more I read, the more I also understood how dark these times were as well, and how a lot of our problems now come from this viewpoint of the Renaissance. But it was just something that for 2 years really filled me with. I made a whole body of work around it. I was reading about it. It was really very important. And actually, it turned out that this whole body of work ended up in the Venice Biennale last year. And
wow, I'm sorry I didn't see that. Had you ever done a kind of commission collaboration with musicians or for musicians before?
No, I have had a lot of musicians in my life, and but I personally am not very musical. I have a rather strange and not that sophisticated taste. And I don't listen to music when I'm working.
I was about to ask you.
Yes.
And I think you're probably rare among artists. This one thing that writers really envy about painters is that you're able to listen to music, or a lot of people listen to audiobooks or just the radio. And
that I do, actually.
Writer, yeah. So I wanted to say about the show, the current show that just opened last week or 2 weeks ago at Petzel. And there are a lot of great things about it, but one of the first thing that really struck me is just the kind of generous variety of the work, and that there's not only, and we can see the images later, but not just the a dozen or so large paintings, but also I didn't count them, but there must have been something like 50 small paintings. 70. And there's the combination of the intensity and the number of the paintings, and this sense that which is true, I think, of your work for a long time, this sense of freedom that you give yourself. And the one phrase that kept coming into my mind was the phrase, "It's forbidden to forbid," which I think is from the May 68, c'est interdit d'interdire.
Destroy what destroys you, but that's a different thing, of course, yeah.
And so that was really the kind of immediate spirit of the show. I just wanted to say thanks for that. But I'd like to there was on the press release, there are 5 quotations, and I just wanted to mention them and ask you about them, and what was it, how do they relate to the work. And the first one is from Peter Handke, and I'll just read it briefly. But what does work mean? Work, he thought, is something in which material is next to nothing, structure almost everything, something that rotates on its axis without the help of a flywheel, something whose elements hold one another in suspense, something open and accessible to all, which cannot be worn out by use. The phrase that jumps out at me there is, material is next to nothing, structure almost everything. Is that something that you would like viewers to have in their minds when looking at your work and making their way through it? Like, and you know, I'm not sure what Hanke meant by material or what you take it to be, but you know, well, obviously you're a very materialistic painter. You're very, like, the matière is really important to you. But it seems to me that there's something there that you want to highlight, and I'm just wondered if you could talk about that.
First of all, I love Handke for the clarity of his thoughts. You know, like the way he really shaves a sentence down to how it really perfectly expresses what he is thinking about. When he talks about work, he of course talks about the literary work. But in the German original, it says Arbeit, which means just the work, actually. You know, like, and it can be everything. And I loved it that it completely applied, that I felt that it really applied to my painting as well. And I do have to say that for me, materials are tools. You know, like, it is never about the material. You know, like, there are different materials that have different effects, and I have, you know, like, my generation of painters were basically all self-taught. You know, like, so we never started with the brush strokes and is cadmium red better than this. We found that out really slowly, or especially now the painting scene where I came from in Germany. It was almost forbidden to learn how to paint, you know, like, so from the very beginning, I was just feeling my way through everything that I could probably use. And that included spray paint, that included all the pigments. I'm still shuddering when I think about the poisonous pigments that I was just mixing and throwing onto the canvas. And it actually, from the very beginning, included charcoal powder, which I used to kind of give depths to different, and also a sense of weight, I guess. And there's certain things that I still use that I discovered for myself as materials, but I have never had this respect for it as something that wants to stand on its own, or that I would want to highlight as something on its own.
Where the image that's up now of the blue guitar painting, I think in some ways that is a great illustration of what you were saying. I think there are so many different kinds of materials, different kinds of paint, different kinds of application. I mean, I think that is this one that has acrylic and oil and crayon, and that is, you know, I think that like, I think about your work sometimes as a dialectic between the one and the many. And I think this show was very much about the many more than the one. And this painting in particular is so overcharged, so
yeah, there's no lack in the paintings, and there's no lack in the installation. And I know that this might be almost like a controversial thing, you know, like, they are really almost too much, every single one. But I have to disagree with you about the idea that this is about the variety. It is actually not. It is about different paintings, each doing one thing. You know, like, and it is, for me, I was very happy in the end that the installation worked out to look good, but it was not a guarantee. I didn't work for the installation, and it was not the point to show a variety. It's just the way I work, and every painting that I make has a different starting point in a certain way, or a different desire behind it. And what is important for me is not that somebody comes in and gets the whole thing. What is important and what I see is that people go in and they zoom in on their painting. You know, like that they are in front of one painting in that extended moment of trying to understand that one painting, and then to understand another painting, and then having that one painting talk back to them personally, that they can actually follow up with their own thoughts. Because what I try to do is also to make an image that in its complexity is so new that the first reaction to it you can only do through emotion. You know, like that you have an emotional response before you have your thought about it. And in the best of worlds, that is what I want to achieve with the painting, that it is a proposition for an individual person to find an individual painting.
And I think that makes a lot of sense. And I think it's also because you begin the painting without an idea of what you're going to paint. That, like, you once said that what you're trying to do is paint something that's going to be new and surprising to you, something unknown. And like,
I want to say something about that also, about beginning a painting. I just read this thought. Somebody told it to me, and I think it's great. Deleuze was actually saying there is no such thing as an empty canvas. I always had presumed I'm starting on an empty canvas, but of course that's not true. In his lectures on painting, he says, there is no empty canvas. Every canvas is already full of cliches. So, and that is very true. That's what you start with. You know, like the first thing that you do is already, of course, I'm breathing in my neck. Is that, you know, like, and then I have to deal with that. Either you can react to that with aggression, you can react to that with frustration or with a concept. I react to that. You can also react to it with joy. You know, like with something like, I'm going to joyfully go in there and you're like almost like destroy it with the first move I made, and you're like get everything out of the way, and then unbury my painting out of that world that's already there.
Well, your work, I can see how it's in some ways exemplary of what Deleuze is talking about, in that you've always been very direct and open and candid about your use of pre-existing materials as the kind of as elements that you work with, that sources from you know, a lot of looking at books, looking at other painters, looking at the past, and that, you know, I think the idea, Deleuze's idea, and also I think what Roland Barthes does in his book SZ, about where he takes apart line by line story by Balzac, and he shows how each one of these sentences, each one of these concepts is already somehow existing, and there is no, you know, it's like, I guess, such a post-structuralist, postmodernist idea that everything is already always encoded culturally and socially. But about your work, I think that it's not like there is not a model Charline von Heyl painting. There is like that we can then compare each new painting to some sort of ideal painting of yours, because you're constantly, and this is one of the things I really love about your work, you're constantly scrambling things and not knowing where you're going to go with the painting, and giving yourself a kind of freedom. About the process, though, one thing I wondered looking at this show is the color grounds. Like, do you usually start with putting one color onto the linen or canvas?
No, in fact, I mean, with this particular exhibition, I really wanted to also, or let's put it that way, in the last 2 years, what has interested me was to deal with colors that I usually don't use and to actually but to tell you the truth, every single one of the paintings that has a flat color behind it is on top of another painting that I have destroyed. And it is something, though, that in this, for example, there are several paintings that have the color red in it, which is such a bitch to paint with. And so sometimes it's just really about the challenge. Like, I want to make a red painting. What could that look like? How would I feel about it? You know, like, so this is something that I have added. I do like, and you were talking about stripes, you know, like if I want to start with pure joy, I just put stripes on a painting, on a canvas, because I just love stripes, as you can see.
Yeah, you do love stripes, but yeah, I said that compared to previous bodies of work, there are not as many stripes in these paintings, but this painting here that's on screen, Funny Bone, which to me looked like there was no other painting like it compositionally in this show, though I think you have done some other paintings in the past that have this verticality there, but it's got one of the motifs that turns up again and again in the new paintings, which is the handprint. And I guess one of the things I wondered about that is, and as with any question, you don't have to answer if you don't want to, but is this an actual imprint of a hand, or is this a depiction of a handprint? It is your real hand.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, and it is something, it's interesting, first of all, about this particular painting. It is what I call a bridge painting that kind of bridges the works that came before. In that case, it was the Primavera series with the work that is there now. And this particular painting had different titles. The first one was Cello Shop Talk, because it was kind of after I made all the paintings about Primavera, I made this painting about how I felt listening to Matt Heimowitz recording and being on Zoom with all those different composers in our studio in Marfa. And it was super important for me to get this, like to see how music gets composed, how the composer has not heard it before Matt Heimowitz plays it to him for the first time, and how the cellist then kind of works together with the composer to create the piece. It's been incredibly exciting to, and I actually, if you guys go to theprimaveraproject.com, you have the whole information about this project, which is really amazing. So this was first, it was called the Cello Shop Talk, but then also paintings are not supposed to be about something in particular like that. So then I called it Funny Bone, because a funny bone is about the bone that makes your whole skeleton sing. You're like, where you, in the worst way, but still it is kind of this vibration. And this vibration is something that I wanted to have in this painting. And of course, the stripes are always also have something to do with wallpapers. I always have something to do with, like keeping the spectator out. And the handprints have different functions. One thing that I discovered in the last body of work that was one of those little things that in the studio just make you happy, is that if you put your handprint on, and of course the mind is going to immediately think handprint. You're like, if you make a whole pattern out of your handprints, you're like, it's just, that's how we're conditioned. You're like, but we're also conditioned to see first an eye before we see the hand. So if you put a dot in the middle of the handprint, you don't see the handprint anymore, because your brain tells you there are eyes, and suddenly you can play with this being, suddenly that looks more like something wild or so. in that case, I mean, you see that there are the handprints that look like little bones that are at the side of the painting
Yes.
as a pattern, where you don't read them immediately as handprints. And then there are the handprints, which are this abject gesture, which is like smearing almost, like, which has this a lot of other connotations that have more to do with disrespect, or let's say, of course, it's also a directness, and the body comes into the painting in a way that, and actually the painter comes into the painting. So yes, I've thought a lot about the handprints, and I have been using it's actually, for example, in the painting, a child telling a joke. It's full of handprints, but you don't really read them immediately.
Another thing that I saw in a lot of the paintings, a lot of the new paintings, even more than handprints, are animals.
Right.
And it's not the first time you've painted animal images, but so in here they're like, I mean, we can see, I think that painting, they're popular toys. So they're, before talking about animals, I just actually want to talk about something else, which this painting does pretty dramatically, which is flatness. I think that it's one of the things that I think is really distinctive about your work, is that you are like, there is very shallow, the space is always very shallow, and the elements, which are sometimes almost modular, but that flatness is, I think, so distinctive in a way. And I know that you've also been really interested and influenced by graphic design, and particularly going back into a post-war graphic design of like the period where you were growing up in the 50s and 60s and 70s, and that is 60s and 70s. So I wonder, I guess my first question is about the flatness, and that seems really, the way you approach flatness is not out of some kind of Greenbergian notion that since a painting is a flat surface, it should not have any illusionistic depth. And they are another one even more so dramatically flat. And I wonder why do you know why that works for you, or what the flat image allows you to do that if you had more of a sense of perspective and depth wouldn't be possible?
Yes.
Where that relates to graphic design?
It does not link to graphic design. It's just really, I do love the way that I work in layers, and so far it of course does have, because it comes from the line, it appeared like this painting, for example, Sad, really came out of me doing one single line. It was really strange. I got up from the chair that I was sitting on, and I went to the painting with this weird feeling that you have, this weird sad tenderness that you have when you think you're actually ruining a painting, but you can't do it otherwise. So to actually go there, it had just with a piece of charcoal to make one single line. And I had been thinking a lot about the fact that right now some 70% of pre-puberty girls, like 14-year-old girls, or 12, or girls in puberty, are saying that they're sad as their first emotional state, and that kind of course, made me so sad. And like that kind of also the hopelessness of that sadness. And I had been thinking about that, and actually this one line kind of conveyed exactly a cipher that translated this. I usually don't work like that, but in that case, it really seemed to need to happen. And I think for me, it is an iconic and important painting, and I kept it for myself because of that, because I really, it did something. But the flatness thing about it is that the painting stays an image. You like that it actually, and you like, you have abstraction, you can be abstract, you can be representational, and neither of it fits for me. I would say I'm not abstract, I'm not representational, I'm presentational. You like, so that you like the work needs to be in the present, coming out at you. You like, so that you don't go into it like, as a window or something like that. And this.
I read somewhere where you described that effect as you don't want the viewer to go into the painting, but you want it to seem as if the painting, elements of the painting are falling out of the painting.
Yes, exactly.
Towards us.
Yes. And for that, it has to stop on the canvas, you know, like, so that it comes forward, that you can make it your own in this way, that you construct this image from the painting. And it's hard to explain. It's just in the moment where I have a representational, and of course I use sometimes representational, but then I use them as ciphers, not as, coming from drawing, I almost never have illusionistic space in a way that it allows you to get into the painting.
I think that recognizable images in your work are, because of the flatness, they, even though it's like, you know, it's the horse's head or a face, it's still, because it's flat, it's already somehow abstracted, that there's less of a discontinuity, or and it's not about, you know, it's not about mixing representation and abstraction together. So maybe this brings us to back to where we started a few minutes ago, which is the presence of animal imagery in this work, and I guess throughout a lot of the paintings, but especially in a lot of the small paintings, which have the title, the group title, Paradoxical Lamb, and there are so.
Yeah, it's interesting because also the way we come from the flatness to that, because there is actually a reason for that. So I had finished this body of work with the Renaissance and with all those beautiful ideas, and which suddenly I became extremely suspicious about for obvious reasons. And so I started to think, so what was actually going on before that? Were the dark Middle Ages before, you know, as I say, that Platon has been rediscovered at that moment with Botticelli, and Neoplatonism opened up everything, so that there was a recurrent, you know, like you had this possibility to go back into the myth. But is it true that the Middle Ages were so dark that nothing was happening? And of course, not only is it not true, I discovered that when I got into the illuminated manuscripts, that those images were frankly way more exciting to me than the whole bunch of Renaissance painting, including the Primavera. And maybe because they are flat, because they are graphic, because they are in layers, because the colors are simple, because they have a very strange kind of humor, you like, and because the metaphors in it are so crazy. So I, you know, like, really went into that got really into the illuminated manuscripts, printed a lot of them out, had so much joy with that, and discovered this whole, and that, of course, the apocalypse and the revelation of St. John, which also felt, appropriate with it last year. And at the end of times, Jesus Christ comes back as a slaughtered lamb with 7 eyes and 7 horns. And he opens the book of 7 seals. And this image, I've always been interested in the demonic divine. And in the whole of the Bible, strange images like that are not allowed, but suddenly there it is. It's completely insane as an image, but it is represented. So you get all those images of the actual, and there it is. There are a lot of, almost all the lamps in, and not all of them are, because a lot of them then were just a feeling about, the end of times, the toads, all the other symbolic images from the apocalypse. But the demonic divine with this lamb with the 7 horns and the 7 eyes, that is so insane and so close to, if you think about it, Satan being a goat. The whole heavy metalness of this whole thing was just so inspiring. So I made almost all that work just not in one go. It was just happening while I was painting the other paintings. But that was my state of mind. And I guess at the same time, the donkey was an animal I got obsessed with, because I'm thinking a lot about how animals are used by humans. And the donkey was for me then this animal that gets used in this kind of, it's almost like the archaic, iconic image of the animal that suffers. And of course, Bresson, the Au hasard Balthazar is one of my favorite movies, and I had just seen it then again. And so I wanted that donkey image. And actually there I took the 1-line image from a Czech illustrator who did make a illustration of that book, The Green Mare. So it's not quite a donkey, but still. Anyway, long story short, so the animals in this show really have a whole ballast of metaphor and emotion and joy, because on the other hand, it's of course total fun to use the 7 horns and just the number 7 or the 7 dots, or once you start looking for that, you see it everywhere.
The Book of Revelations, the Apocalypse, as it's often also called, it's a crazy text, and really hallucinatory, and that, but the image of the lamb, I think first it's seen, John is told there's going to be a lion, and then he looks to the lion, but it's not a lion, it's a lamb. And this lamb, as you said, it's been sacrificed, it's been killed, and yet it's still alive. And
it has horns.
The lamb is the resurrection and the symbol of Jesus. But it's also, I think the role of the lamb in Christian thought is this symbol of, it's like the opposite of power. It's the opposite of it's the Christian Christ versus the Roman emperor. It's that. And so I think that there is this sense of fragility and a weakness that paradoxically becomes something powerful. And so I don't want to read too much into this about the medium of painting or art, but it's there if someone wants to play with it, I think.
Hence the paradoxical lamb. Yes.
These were all on burlap. I noticed all the small paintings are on burlap, and this one is the only one I think that does this, where you have this angle on the lower part of the painting that makes it look, it gives it a kind of dimensionality, but
the burlap was actually a kind of a jump forward out of a moment of anger, because in the last museum show that I had, I have since, I don't know, decades now, always made works on paper and in exactly that format, like 19 to 24. And they're part of my practice. They're very important to me, but to show them in the museum, I would have had to dim the light in the whole museum, even though I had gessoed and the whole paper, and there was not like the tiniest bit of paper to be seen, but they were hid behind glass, they were framed, it's all heavy, it's all becomes so important. So I thought, I'm going to go on doing those things, but instead of making them on paper, I'm just going to use a different background. And so I looked for it, and on Amazon actually, and on Dick Blick and everywhere, you get those things, and they're super cheap. It's just pre-stretched burlap, and I bought them in bulk. And I have to say then to put the gesso on it in this way that it left a frame, which was also a nice paradox, because it looks so much like art, but it's kind of the opposite. But to put the it was such, when you don't know what to do, to just put the gesso on into the acrylic and make it just with the brush. I just love to do that, and to make like 6 in a row, and it's such a zen thing to do. And so I had those lying around the studio all the time, and I was just using them like I used to use paper. And now I can hang them in whatever light I want.
But you're still making drawings, I hope.
Yeah, I'm actually sitting here now in I just made an extra drawing studio, but now I'm actually, the drawings I make now are some that I have completely stopped making, and that's interesting as well. I have not made any drawings in a domestic size. Where you actually, go out of your wrist. Everything I do is coming out of the arm movement. So now I'm starting for the first time in a long time to use watercolors, to use gouache to make small pencil drawings. And I don't know where that it's going and if I need to do this, but right now I'm having real fun with it. But I didn't used to do it. There's almost nothing of that from the last 2 decades.
I can't wait to see what comes of that. I'm just looking, things keep striking me from the slideshow. So the 2 paintings that we're looking at now, which I think one interesting thing to me about that is that they're clearly like the 2 canvases that are most similar to each other in the show, and that you put them together invites us to look at them and compare them and try to find like, why are these 2 paintings together? And there's certainly the use of this geometric rectangular shapes that seem to come out of an implied grid. And I can't help thinking about Hans Hofmann in looking at these paintings, and it's the idea of the push-pull, and Hofmann's idea that there are other ways to create space in painting and in abstract painting. And I think I just wondered whether that was something, whether he's an artist who's like a kind of really influential, but also a painter who made a lot of paintings that look sort of bad and in terms of taste. And yet is really, so full of energy and ideas. I just wondered, do you have any thoughts about, is that someone you've thought about or looked at? Hans Hofmann?
I haven't in a very long time. I did but whenever I see a painting of his somewhere, I'm always high-five him in my mind. Because yeah, of course, there's something extremely alive about his work. And it is sometimes you have to cringe because it's very much of its time, but it does survive into now because of its weird unpleasantnesses that he creates in the painting. But I don't think that I have been looking at him and it has not stirred a desire of using that. It's the two paintings. What's interesting about them is that they happened at different times in different places. Like the black one in the Navy Yard in Brooklyn and the other one, the pink one, Aléatoire, in Marfa. But they both have this kind of almost heavy-handed, especially the pink one. It's painted on sand, and maybe there you're right with the 50s, and because that was always something that in the 80s was like the ultimate. And for me, it's more an 80s paintings than anything, because it's like an 80s reaction to the 50s. Like what are we not allowed to do? Is painting on sand. Like let's do something ironic. So let's do something funny. Let's do something funky. So a lot of that is in this painting, but not to make a statement about it, just because at that point, actually, because there's like a gazillion things under it, because it just, when a painting wants to break out, it actually does it, I find, often in a extremely merry way. And at the same point, it's just strange colors. It does something. It worked in the end, and I was surprised that it did. And that painting is called Attic, and it's actually really funny because it has another painting under it that I overpainted years ago, and then it was in storage, unprotected, and dust and spider webs did settle on it. And so when I just lost my storage space, so I said, I'm going to use up everything that I have that I have not been in the mood to do something with. And so I took that painting, but I didn't clean it, and it was such joy to go with especially there then with oil paint into the spider webs and push them aside and see how the oil was spreading it a little further. And it was a complete nerdy, but also fun thing to do.
Yeah, both of these paintings seem like they've gone through a lot to get to their
actually the black painting, once I started it, I mean, it of course has, I don't even know which painting under it, but the way that it was one of the paintings that I made basically behind my back, where I just completely randomly always did something without thinking, just completely following my instinct and not judging it, not doing anything, just cleaning a brush on it, like putting something together. And in the end, I was actually kind of delighted how it came out. And if you go in the show and look at it, you will still see the spider webs. Like, I have protected them, but they probably will not survive till the end of times.
Maybe you should add spider webs to the list of materials.
We were talking about that. I think it's not in the official one, but it is in the internal one.
I want to come back to one of the other quotes on the press release, and this is from Gertrude Stein. And she says, clarity is of no importance because nobody listens, and nobody knows what you mean, no matter what you mean, nor how clearly you mean what you mean. But if you have vitality enough of knowing enough of what you mean, somebody and sometime, and sometimes a great many, will have to realize that you know what you mean. And so they will agree that you mean what you know you mean, which is as near as anybody can come to understanding anyone. Like, that's such a radical, thought-provoking passage. And one of the things it implies is, not the impossibility of communication, but that communication will always be lacking somehow. But particularly for someone to look at a work of art, to read a work of literature, we still hold on to, even though we know it's impossible, this idea that we will be able to understand the artist, understand what was going through their mind, what they were thinking, and have access to some kind of, to their subjectivity. And that's not possible, but it's by choosing this quote from Stein, it's you seem to be telling the viewer and that it's okay if you don't worry too much about what you think Charline von Heyl was trying to say with this painting. This is your painting. I'm never going to be able to fully convey what was going through my mind, but this is the painting. This is where we meet. And so I think it could be read as either pessimistic or
it's pure joy. I mean, it's just clarities of no importance. Yes. I mean, that's what we can do with painting, is that create another world where something else is important, where it's not about language, where it's not about formulating something. I mean, I realized actually I come from a family where everybody is obsessed with language, including myself. It's just, that's why I cannot write anything. People ask me to write something all the time. That's why I cannot prepare for a talk. I'm obsessed with language, and I cannot, it freaks me out how obsessed I am. I'm a hoarder of books. I'm always reading. My brother has a website since 20 years about, he's called The Corrector, about the right way of using grammar in Germany. That is the main website that people go to if they need to correct something in a text or so. My father was somebody who, at the time, was formulating law for the government, so he was also about the precise language. My uncle is obsessed with puns, which is also something that I'm really into. So I think that I actually see now that the way that I'm obsessed with painting is through finding a way of eradicating language. Of course, you can never completely do that, but to have a portal that through the fact that you come to a painting that you have not seen before, that has, my paintings, no lack, that is full of information, your first reaction will be naturally to have an emotion before you have a thought. From that emotion, you have your own thoughts. It's just really, and that I am interested in. I think that's just, even if it's a small moment that extends before bang, you say something about it. That is where I'm interested in painting, and where I'm get this joy of making it, that to find this proposition that's going to save you from language, even if it's just for a very short moment.
This is exactly why writing about painting, or at least the kind of painting you make, is so difficult. And you just, as the French writer Francis Ponge says, you strike the subject, but it flies off unhurt once again.
That's so good.
And
say that again.
I'm mangling it, but he says something like, the subject is, you strike the subject, or you reach out to the subject as if it were a bird you were trying to shoot or something, but whatever you might do, it still flies off unhurt no matter what. So I think that's kind of what happens when one tries to write about painting. And so I'm just thinking about language and the fact that you left Germany in the mid-90s, you came to New York. You have talked about how you found a much more welcoming and less hierarchical and certainly more painting friendly world in New York, where you could actually begin to talk to other painters, and whereas in Cologne, that was, it's not just that painting was problematic, but it was this a much more, I don't know, you had to worry about doing the wrong thing or saying the wrong thing or making the wrong kind of art, and so, but I think also, since language is something that you're saying that you're both immersed in and really attracted to, but you also want to escape it through painting, you're also leaving the country where the language, your mother language, is spoken. You're like, you exist, I imagine, mostly, at least when you're here, in English and not in German. And that's, there's a freedom. I guess the best example of that is, sorry to keep dropping all these literary allusions, but Samuel Beckett, who, once he began to write in French and not English, found something incredibly liberating. And it was great for me to read when you talk about that, coming from Cologne to New York, and that New York was and still is, in some ways, somehow, there's a community of painters, there's a dialogue among painters that exists here, I think doesn't really exist anywhere else that I know of. And so I think, but one of the things I was also thinking about is that you mentioned irony, and I think there was certainly in the 80s, and there was a lot of, one could only paint ironically. And I don't know that I feel like there's not so much irony in your work anymore. Is that true?
Yeah, and I think in retrospect, I would say that neither in any of the others' work, irony is something that has a expiration date that's pretty fast and furious, and has to do with the audience, that like a kind of like ancestral audience that is in the joke. And that joke didn't translate very well, and was also never quite that interesting for painting. The painters that came out of it that I love, like Kippenberger or Albert Oehlen, are painters that are just very good painters. And the irony that was part of it had also to do with the fact that we all taught ourselves. We had to be ironic. This had to be ironic oil painting because we couldn't. Or wouldn't, or were not interested in doing it another way. So it was like Albert would say, what if I put oat flakes into the oil paint? That's an ironic abstract painting. But of course, in the end, all that is not so very important. And for me, that is now really a time that's very long ago. So I never think about it. But I do think a lot about the friends that I have here, and the painting community that I'm in, and how lucky I am and how great they are. And also the New York audience. This has been such an amazing event for me so far, to get this kind of reaction from me coming from Bonn, Germany, and making my life here, and to actually be able to communicate with the best audience in the world, in my opinion, and so many different generations, and everything is just, it's incredible. I'm incredibly grateful.
Well, that's what makes New York such a great place, a great city, is that sense of welcoming. And I obviously don't mean just the art world, but the welcoming of immigrants, the welcoming, which is now so prevalent and so much on our minds. So yeah, I realize that's a long time ago, but like how do we I think that one of the things that's also changed is there's so much painting being made, there's so many artists, there's so much art being made. There's no longer, and for some time there hasn't been any sense of a kind of avant-garde hierarchy. There's like, and it trying to make sense of things, trying to like imagine the sort of painting as making a kind of schema or mapping it. Like it's very hard to map in a way that makes sense. And maybe that's always the case. Maybe like when you're in the midst of an experience, a historical moment, everything is just there. None of it makes sense. You're just in the middle of the forest and trying to find your way around. But I think that's certainly, I think for critics is a challenge, and I think for curators is a challenge. And the so I don't know where I'm going with this, but I think that I think that in some ways what I liked about your choice about the Gertrude Stein is that you are acknowledging that there's still a lot to be said, even if we can't achieve this ideal total interpretation, understanding, historical objectivity, and like bird's eye view.
Fantasy anyway. Like it's just and the thing that counts is that you can stand in front of a painting or any artwork and make it yours. Like, and that it actually gives you space that you didn't have before. Like, and that is still incredibly important. And it is important that there are people like me who cannot do anything else but make that. Like I would be completely destroyed if I could not paint. Like it's just that's who I am, and that's so it's, and there are a lot of us out there, and we need to continue doing it, and I think it makes sense. Like, and it is something that needs to be in the world. So, and that hasn't changed. Like no. Because there was a short time in Cologne that somebody said something this way, and then there was a short time in the Whitney program that somebody said something else, or all that doesn't matter in the end.
No, I think we still, as human beings, and this has been true since the caves, since the people who painted the caves in Lascaux and Chauvet, like there is something inherent in the human psyche that needs to be, as I say, like in rooms surrounded by colored walls, or like colored dirt on the walls surrounding you. Like this is just something, despite all the, apart or beyond all of the
that's probably why I put the handprints back in. Just as a reminder that there is actually a physical need to like put color on surface.
I'm just wondering whether we should open this up to questions, or
Yeah.
shall we keep talking?
No, this has been absolutely incredible. Thank you both so much for walking through the exhibition and for that just incredibly generous dialogue. We do have several questions from the audience, so if you're okay with me turning it over to those, Raphael, I will.
Sure.
Okay. I'm going to start with a question from Kathy Shaver. Kathy, would you like to be unmuted to ask directly, or would you like me to ask for you? You'll be unmuted. Okay. Here you go.
I don't hear her.
I was interested in the decision to use a uniform canvas size, or as you also referenced, you would work on a uniform paper size.
That's probably my anal side. And it's been, like the paper came in that size. So, like it was a paper block. So I was very used to that particular format. And I didn't want to mentally get away from the idea of this is just paper, but now it's on burlap or so. So I just kept it in the same weird generosity where I have a lot of it flying around and I treat it with disrespect. It's kind of not the canvas that wants something. It's really, I don't think they're even made to be painted on, and I hope they don't have some toxic thing in it that's going to eat the painting up from behind. But I was really happy that you get those things in basically the same shape, sizes as the paper. And of course, there are different sizes in the exhibition, but they're the usual absolutely classic 9 to 11, 11 to 14, 8 to 10, 18 to 24. Those are completely classic measurements, and I just like to stick with that because it's easier to get it.
Thank you for that question, Kathy, and thank you for that answer, Charlene. The next question is from Jason Rosenfeld. Jason, I will allow you to unmute, and I'm going to pull up the painting that you're asking about.
Yeah, let's pull it up. Hi, Charlene. Thank you so much for this fantastic talk. I wanted to ask about what was my favorite picture in the show, and also other people who I talked to very unscientifically. Blue Grotto from 2023, and this one you're using crayon. I see lots of things in here, not just the sublime, but also like the hind leg of the Delphi charioteer and smile face and bunny ears. I don't know, but I would love for you to just talk a little bit about this picture. My question doesn't involve poetry or anything else, just had a visceral reaction to this very beautiful work. Thank you.
I want to first talk about the visceral reaction. You're right that a lot of people have that. I think it is because it is the only painting that allows you in. You're like where you actually go into the space instead of having to deal with something coming out at you. And of course, the blue is a very emotional color, and it is an emotional painting actually, but it really kind of, you don't have to do much work to decipher it. It kind of unfolds in time by itself, I have the feeling. And I think that is something that people react to, and that it has this effect of giving yourself over to the painting. And the motifs in it are motifs that are all through the gallery. It is the donkey leg again, and the donkey legs, and which of course have nothing to do. It has, of course, a little bit of an underwater atmosphere, but I wanted to also bring it back to the fact that this is not underwater, it's a painting. And what you call the rabbit ears is actually the donkey face that comes from this Czech picture book from the 60s, The Green Mare. And the cover had this one line thing. And I'm always obsessed with somebody who finds an iconic image out of one line. So, and it is a donkey with the blinders. And that was one of the images that I have used a lot in the last 2 years, because it really related to a lot of things.
I mean, do you think the blue is like a bit of a concession to a kind of conventional idea of beauty, and then you're playing against it?
No, in this particular show, or in this last 2 years, I wanted for the first time to use colors that I usually don't use. And it started with me being obsessed with this really dead chrome dioxide green. And then I thought, okay, I'm going to make a red painting, which was really a bitch. And then I thought, okay, I'm going to make a blue painting. It's as simple as that, frankly.
All right, great. Thank you so much. And thank you for the show. It's wonderful.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jason. Our next question is going to be from John Locicero. John, I'm going to give you the chance to unmute to ask directly.
Okay, my question is sort of about generations. Here in New York, at the Museum of Modern Art, we have a strong example of Gerhard Richter's painting about the Beider Meinhof group. And there's a notion of the political unconscious. And I wonder if how you feel about relating to that generation of politically conscious painting and the notion that we may unconsciously be complicit with power systems.
Well, that's a heavy question. I have to say, I actually saw that Baader-Meinhof exhibition when it was exhibited for the first time in the Haus Lange in Krefeld, I think it was. And it was incredibly strong and moving exhibition. And I also have to say that I can't stand Gerhard Richter. This was one of the moments where I thought he really managed to do something there. I think in general, he is more on the cynical side. So I don't quite believe his true engagement there. But it shows also the power of painting and the power of pictures, that it doesn't really matter if you like or do not like the artist or what he says, if that is the truth of what he feels, and I'm sure it is. It's just the fact was that this particular exhibition was unbelievable. And I have to say, I think it is very, very hard to do, to actually work with political photography or images of violence, or have a direct way of using it in painting. I think it often looks disingenuous or not quite right. I don't know. I don't know if that answers your question.
Can I add something to that?
Yeah.
Just going back to the question of language, and one of the things about Richter is that he has written so much and given so many interviews, and his collected writings, like the most recent edition in English I've seen, is about 500 pages long. And I always contrast that with his contemporary Zigmar Polke. And Polke's, he gave in his lifetime, I think, 3 interviews, one of which was just a kind of hoax with someone else pretending to be him. And he wrote very, very little. And like, to me, those are like that's there. It's, I guess we always want to try to think about things in binaries, which is problematic. But I just think that here's an example of one artist who can never stop talking about his work and is incredibly contradictory about his work. I mean, he'll say one thing in 1985 and then completely contradict it 10 years later. But that's like, there's room, I guess, for all kinds. But it's that trying to explain the work is going back to that Gertrude Stein quote, clarity.
Right.
It's Richter's work is not as, maybe the best work is the one that's least clear.
Yeah. And of course, is there a shadow side to the art world? Of course there is. Are there questions about how it is working, how it is, built up? Of course there is. I mean, yes, that's a given. But does it make sense to make your work of art about that? It depends on who you are.
Thank you so much for those responses. And thank you, John, for that question. Charline, I have a question. I'm wondering how you know a painting is finished. You talked about destroying paintings underneath the current paintings, and I'm curious when you know that you've met yourself.
It is actually an interesting question. I've said it before, and it shifts around a little bit, but there is a moment you're like, I'm painting while I am painting it, and that might be months, it might be a long time, it might be also 3 days. Sometimes it's just there, like it is finished when it feels that if I would destroy it, I would take something away from the world. You're like that. There is this weird moment where I start to respect the painting as something that has nothing to do with me anymore. And sometimes, for example, with that, sometimes it's just the title that does it. You're like, and that was happening with the painting, a child telling a joke, because that was a painting that I had worked on, and it is really overworked and almost clumsy. Worked on for a long time, just shifting it in all kinds of directions. It was upside down. It had a gazillion things, and it just didn't. I wasn't happy with it. And then my assistant Elise came in, and she stood in front of the painting, and she said, "That looks like a child telling a joke." And in that second, I got goosebumps, and the painting was finished. You're like, suddenly, that was exactly what the painting was, and you're like, at that point, I could not take it away anymore.
I love that. Thank you so much for that answer. We have two more questions, Charline, if you'll have them. One from Andrew Woolbright. Andrew, I'll give you the chance to unmute to ask directly.
Hi, can you hear me? Charline, Raphael, thank you so much. Phenomenal conversation today. Quickly, just wanted to say I keep taking students by to see your show because of all the possibilities and ideas of paintings that you shed. I find it hilarious you don't like Gerhard Richter, because I feel like he also kind of ends up developing possibilities in painting, but maybe comes at it, like you said, from a more cynical place. And you seem to really come at it from the opposite view, which is keeping yourself off balance. And I just want to thank you for that generosity of being off balance. You've seen so many exhibitions. I'm wondering if there's one that comes to mind when you were a young artist that was formative to you in your practice, one that invited you into being a painter, or one that you've been thinking of recently.
Well, I had told my parents that I'm a painter when I was 5 years old, and so and then there are certain artists that, like I always, when I'm feeling kind of stuck, that kind of restores this joy that I have, and then one of them is Paul Klee, strangely enough. Like there's just something about the way those little things are finished, and they're so I don't know, I don't have to explain it, but there is a whole series. There are artists like that. I would say the first time that I was tuned into the fact that there was not just me wanting to paint, but that there was actually also an art world, was the show Westkunst 1980 in Cologne, which was a survey show and which had unbelievable works. The one that really rocked my boat was Paul Teck, The Pyramid. And suddenly that really went like, okay, this is not just about painting. Like, this is art is really working on every level. And so, yeah, that was important.
Thank you so much for that question, Andrew, and thank you for that response, Charline. Our last question today, before we conclude today's program with a poetry reading by Judith Goldman, is going to be from Phong. Phong, I'm going to give you the chance to unmute.
Thank you, Chloe. Charline, the show is amazing. I've been there twice, and so excited. I called Raphael right away just before the opening the day before. and yeah, I just felt so inspired by the show. And I know the last time I saw you before the pandemic, we talked briefly about Immendorf,
Yes,
who you studied with. And I know that he was one of the most anarchistic painter.
Yes.
And it just brought to mind just now thinking about him and his work. He's relatively young, but still the whole tradition of anarchy in Germany came out from, Romanticism. Actually, I was just talking to, funny enough, with Jasper John like a week ago about Immanuel Kant, who criticized all of them, with the Schiller, with the Goethe, with the Lessing, with the Heinrich Heine. But he turned out to be what Isaiah Berlin called the restrained romantic, which is perfect for Jasper. He is a restrained romantic. You're the opposite. So
Well,
yeah, go ahead.
No, I mean, Kant was the one who was, like putting such an importance of the fact that thought and feeling have to come together. And that there is a way through the sublime to go through feeling to thought. And of course, I don't know, that's of course not an answer to a question that I didn't give you the chance to pose.
No, but Kant is certainly have brought that two things together, exactly.
It is something that's really important to me, to be able to first go to feeling and then to thought. But
right.
I want both to happen.
Yeah, so what is my question? Question is that there was, I think I'm paraphrasing now, Schiller, who once say, food is not what I hunger for.
Yes, and
but it's made food by my hunger,
Yes, that's absolutely. And it's funny because I bought a painting of Immendorf's not so long ago, and it's hanging here, and it says, das Bild muss die Funktion der Kartoffel erfüllen. Painting has to fulfill the role of the potato.
Oh, what a cryptic and poetic statement that is.
I learned so much from him, and I really loved the guy. He was hilarious, but he was also really a great and wild and interesting painter.
Yeah, so let me ask you another quick question here, because I
worked with him for a long time.
Yeah, I was at the very beginning of the Philip Guston now showed at the the National Gallery of Art, and we all love Guston, and we also know how much he hated minimalism. So much that he had a discussion with Dora Aston about it, which is printed in her book, Yes and But yet, after the Jewish Museum show in 1967, I think, where he began to move through abstraction, and then ended up began to spare down everything to one line and two line. To me, that is taken from minimalist thinking, but nevertheless, leading to before the infamous show 1970 at Marlborough Gallery, Charline, he began making this so-called alphabet painting. Because I'm thinking about you in regard to this show. There's a whole entire room in the show where the alphabet painting, where he made one singular painting dedicated to one singular object, where it's a brush, whether it's a book, whether it's a cup or whatnot, so on and so forth. And I was thinking in regard how you have your own alphabet, but they never repeat exactly what Raphael was referring to. So, that kind of language that doesn't quite always been in constant collision, but yet there's a sense of harmony. What I'm referring to that is that, we all have our own speed of execution. There's a movement that we know predictably, just like what Guston, that consistency of how he applied the paint, the slowness of the brush stroke, I can't figure out how you can do it all.
No brush strokes.
The brush stroke, but also, there's the occasionally there are, but there's so many ways of approaching it, making the image, making the mark, and they all vary,
Thank you for saying that.
Yeah, so I don't, is that part of the anarchist thinking? Or how does the spirit that somehow infuse or imbue into the making? I know that you don't think about things when you make, but there gotta be a source somewhere, no?
I don't know. It's not that direct.
Okay, it's not direct. All right, so here I stop my question then. Just have to think about it, come back and look at the painting some more. All right, willing to do that. Absolutely, with pleasure. All right, so back to you. Thank you.
Great to see you.
Nice to see you, Charline. Back to you, Chloe. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Bong, and thank you again, Charline and Raphael, for today's dialogue, and thank you to all of you for those questions, which were incredibly brilliant and thoughtful. We have a tradition at the Rail of ending our community events with a poetry reading, and it is my absolute pleasure to welcome our Poet Laureate of the Day, Judith Goldman, to the stage. Judith Goldman is author of many books, including A Gone. She's currently at work on a new chapbook, Blank Mount, Mont Blanc. In 2019-2020, she exhibited a collaborative multimedia installation, Open Waters, Northwest Passage, Open Polar Sea, Arctic Plastic, at the Birchfield Penny Art Center in Buffalo. Goldman is an associate professor in the Department of English at SUNY Buffalo, where she directs the Poetics program. She's also poetry features editor for Postmodern Culture. And with that, I'll pass it over to Judith.
Thanks so much. This was such a remarkable conversation. I learned so much, and I'm really looking forward to seeing your show in a couple of weeks. I just wanted to point to a couple of things that you mentioned that sort of chime with this reading unexpectedly. The idea of the paintings being presentational, ideas of flatness. You began with the idea of metamorphosis. When you were talking about the handprints with the little eyes, the pareidolia, that they suddenly turn into faces, your idea that painting is a proposition to save you from language, it may sound strange, but I feel the same way about poetry. And you will also find that there is a donkey in this reading, which is very surprising coincidence. But I just wanted to say that I'm happy to hear about your appreciation for playfulness in language, because this is a playful little reading sort of as a punctuation mark to this larger conversation. I am in disguise. From my hidey hole, I broke, breaking through a break of hawthorn. My gown unhappy with this particular baroque. I felt as though I had found my way. I didn't want to take anything else in. Whereupon we hoped I would be changed back into the human form we had grown accustomed to me in which I had occupied, if not well, then boldly, and with stout good humor, and so thought I deserved my human form. A powerful sense of hop. How may I hop you? Can I help you? Let's get started. Push enter so we can begin. I hop about bewildered. I am gray, like ash. Please keep your receipts. Untitled. Penguins do, they don't flicker off cliffs any quicker than Icarus did. The briny deep do penguins swim. Earth lies flat, but so does heaven lie. I spy. See no more kiss the poles as they cross. Crying, they cry. North star by south, giving a briny light, but with their eyes X'd out. We are in a mill. We are in a mill. I fall in love with the millstone as it is and in its poverty, innocent as pure ray. Took me by the hand and seemed courteous if weary. Its donkey, grizzled, gristless, follows, yet cannot but encircle just one piece of ground. Quotation, quotation, quotation. Can't complain. A whole clause has been left out. Can't. Hiding its face in my sleeve, we leave take, emptying the frame. And my arm now worn to threads, we cling to every second that flies away forever. Snap a shot. Its grain always turns around too soon. Wherefore the earth blow with born corn, behind us reached to lift each flattened blade. Time held me green. We had never been there. Shifting its weight. Man is a speaking animal, but the owl turns its head all the way around. All volcanoes in favor say. tunneling. Get out, there's no more room. Well, then how could I have come in? Don't argue. Thus it was when I was in my mother's womb. Show your stubs. They don't wave back. Scene, a hillock of earth. The bee may be laden and skip the flower. The drawing mocked its own cross-hatching. Squints. You too, I asked. To which I held myself. Cupboards bare, not even a grain of rice. Well, only one grain of rice. The control text, choked by undergrowth interior to words torn from sense, then fetch the means from there, deleted vicinities, bitch who eats her young. Do your share. Go through with it. Do it. I have a single fin and swim in circles. I'm working on it, imitating work. I went in and did it, like a job, in a single take. Leaves it open. What will it come to? Or wondering what has become of it. It falls to you. This is not to be looked at closely, not asked to serve concepts. Do not give it sustained attention. Snap it off like the end of a bean. Defragged in the weight of robes, a blur in language clings to the bare outside of this world. Ahead of a fullness, asking it of you. Shower of meteors on the dirty wall. A little chestnut, grape sits sullen, looking sour. Behind every cave, there is another deeper cave. Clothes that leave us bare. I lost my cell phone and my tongue cries out like a living thing, or a little gilt-edged book, resting the lower genre it hatched and set free. My sparrow is go for to keep his cut. Unneth I cast mine, swallowing my tail or the rental pair. Come what may. A goose spoke with a human voice. The voice laid golden ears. I hid in a pile of leaves and slept, taken merely for firmament. Untitled, sea has no score behind the roar. Father on the beach, calling to the reference, stay on the shore. You must no longer wander. Your grave is here. Your data has been sent. Trackbacks closed. Thank you.
Wow. Thank you so much, Judith. That was such a beautiful reading and such a beautiful conclusion to today's program. Thank you. Thank you, of course, again to Charline and to Raphael. Thank you to Ricky and Hannah at Petzl for all of their support in preparing for today's event. Thank you as well to the Terra Foundation for American Art, who sponsor our NSE program and make daily conversations like this one possible. They also support our growing archive, which you can view on the Rail's YouTube channel. For 22 years, the Brooklyn Rail has provided a platform for arts, culture, and politics through our free monthly publication and public events like this one, our daily NSE. You can check the chat for a link to donate to support the Rail. And if you're free on Monday at 1 p.m., join us for a conversation with Fred Eversley and Amanda Glebisi on the occasion of Eversley's sculpture Parabolic Light, on view now at Doris C. Friedman Plaza in Central Park and curated by Public Art Fund. We'll conclude with a poetry reading by Roberto Harrison. And as is Rail tradition, you all can now turn on your microphones and say hello and goodbye as you leave. Thank you so, so much for joining us today, and have good weekends, everyone.
Very much, Charlene.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Charlene. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you. Thank you, Charlene.
For your reading.
Congratulations on the show.
Yeah,
Thank you.
fabulous
Yes.
show.
Go see the show,
Fantastic.
everybody.
Fabulous.
It requires 2 or 3 viewing experience, prolonged viewing experience.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Awesome.
Congratulations,
Thank you.
Charlene. Thank you.
so
Thank you, Judith.
Thank you, Chloe.
Thank
Thank
you.
you, Raphael.
Gracias,
Thank you,
Rafael.
everyone.